Chapter 11. Leah found herself staring into a beautifully decorated, old-fashioned looking girl's bedroom. The room was lit with candles, 2 on a tall mahogany dresser, flickering against the back wall, and 1 inside a glass hurricane lamp, glowing brightly from a low table in the corner. The walls were papered in dark maroon wallpaper that appeared to be textured like felt. A large canopy bed, all pink and satiny, with a heavy quilted pink bedspread, practically filled the room. And sitting on that canopy bed, her hands folded in her lap, was a girl. The girl appeared to be about Leah's age. She was beautiful in a very old-fashioned kind of way. Her hair was a mass of golden ringlets, worn without a part, the tight yellow curls tumbling onto her forehead and down the sides of her perfect oval face. A black velvet hair ribbon was tied across the crown of her head. She had white skin that looked as if it had never seen the sun, and tiny features, small blue eyes, a perfect straight nose, a tiny mouth. She was wearing a high-necked white blouse that seemed as if it would be stiff and uncomfortable. Ruffles ran down the front, and the sleeves were long and puffy at the shoulders. Her black wool skirt came down over her shoes. It looked heavy and cumbersome. She's like a little Victorian doll, thought Leah, staring in from the doorway. She's even smaller than Dina and more angelic looking. The 2 girls stared at each other for a long time without speaking. The girl in the bed sat very erect, keeping her hands in her lap. Nothing moved except for the flickering shadows caused by the candlelight. Finally, Leah got over her shock well enough to break the silence. "Who are you?" she asked. She was still standing with one hand on the door. "This is my house," the girl said. Her mouth widened into a smile. Her eyes sparkled in the candlelight. "What?" Leah gripped the door tightly. "This is my house. I live here," the girl repeated. Her voice was tiny and sounded like a small child's voice. "But how did you get in here?" Leah insisted. "I mean, up here, in this room." "Do you like my room?" the girl asked eagerly. She slid off the pink quilt and stood up. She moved her hand in a sweeping motion, showing off her room. Her hand, like a small white dove, fluttered in the long candlelit shadows. "Yes, it's very nice," Leah said uncertainly, fear beginning to creep up her spine. "But I don't really understand." "I've been so terribly lonely," the girl said, tilting her head to one side, the golden ringlets falling with it. "So terribly lonely, for so many years." She's a ghost, Leah realized, staring wide-eyed as the girl slowly began to move toward her, a strange smile on her lips. A ghost. But that's impossible, isn't it? "I've been so very lonely," the girl said, stretching her arms out toward Leah as she walked toward her. Her expression was so needy, so hungry. The girl shimmered in the candlelight, her image fading in the shadows, then growing bright again when she moved into the light. A ghost, Leah thought, coming toward me, her arms outstretched. "No!" Leah hadn't even realized that she had uttered the cry. She began backing up, backing toward the safety of the attic. "Please don't go," the girl pleaded in her tiny voice. "You're a ghost," Leah mumbled, taking another step back, gripped with fear, heavy fear that weighted her legs, that made every step a struggle. "I'm so lonely," the girl said, forming her small lips into a child's pout. "Can I touch you? Can I touch your hair?" "No!" Leah screamed again, her terror making her voice high and hoarse. "No, please!" "I won't hurt you," the girl said, her arms still outstretched, her face glowing in the dim candlelight, her eyes sparkling like pale jewels. "No!" Leah slammed the door shut, and, struggling to control her trembling hand, turned the key in the lock. Then she stood staring at the smooth wood of the door, licking her lips, swallowing hard, her mouth dry, her throat choked with fear, trying to catch her breath. "I never should have pulled off the board," she thought. "I never should have opened that door." "Please don't go away," the tiny voice called from the other side of the locked door. "I'm so lonely. I just want to touch your hair." "This can't be real," Leah said aloud. She turned and ran to the ladder. She was awakened the next morning by the wind rattling her twin bedroom windows. The noise startled her awake. She sat straight up in bed. The room felt cold. The morning sky outside the windows was gray and threatening. Her covers were heaped at the foot of her bed, and Leah realized she must have kicked them off in the night. "While I was having that dream," she thought. "It was a dream, wasn't it?" Leah had no memory of leaving the attic after seeing the ghost. She didn't remember turning off the attic light, or climbing back down the metal ladder, replacing the trapdoor, returning to her room, or getting into bed. It had to have been a dream, she told herself. A very vivid and frightening nightmare. So real, so many details. But a dream, nevertheless. At breakfast, she decided not to trouble her parents with it. Her dad had already been to the lumber yard, which opened early on Sunday mornings, for people like him, and he and her mother were heatedly discussing their project for the day, the renovation of the screened-in porch on the side of the house. They're so wrapped up in their plans they don't even know I'm here, Leah thought. She felt amused by their childlike enthusiasm, but also a little hurt, a little left out. As Leah was finishing her pancakes, sopping up the last drop of dark syrup from her plate, the phone rang. It was Stine, asking if Leah would like to go to the indoor tennis club Dina belonged to, and hit a few balls. Leah dressed quickly, pleased by the invitation. Watching the sky grow more threatening outside her bedroom windows, she pulled on a pair of gray sweatpants and a matching sweatshirt. Then she searched her dresser drawers for a more appropriate tennis outfit to change into at the club. It'll feel good to get some exercise, she thought, and I'll be able to tell Dina about the weird dream I had last night. Dina picked Leah up in her parents' station wagon. Driving through the gray streets, a light wet snow beginning to fall, she talked about Luke, her new boyfriend, telling Leah about the concert he took her to the night before, not leaving out a single detail, as far as Leah could tell. It was warm and bright inside the domed tennis club, and most of the courts were taken even though it was Sunday morning. As they began to volley, Leah could tell right away that Dina was the better player. They volleyed for a while, then played a game. I really need a new racket, Leah apologized after missing 2 of Dina's serves in a row. It's funny how people stare at their rackets after missing a ball or messing up, Leah thought, as if the racket were at fault and not the arm that swung it. Dina eased up on her serve, and the 2 girls continued their game. You have a pretty good backhand, Dina said, as they changed into their street clothes afterward. You went easy on me, Leah said, a little embarrassed. A little bit, Dina admitted, but only a little bit. Both girls laughed. Outside the snow had stopped, but the sky remained gray and threatening and the sidewalks were wet. As they walked to Dina's car, Leah began to tell her about the dream, about pulling the boards off the door, about the old-fashioned bedroom, and the girl behind the door. As she talked, her breath formed puffs of white vapor in front of her, like ghosts, she thought, ghosts floating up and vanishing. And then I woke up and remembered every detail of the dream, Leah said, fastening her seatbelt as Dina pulled away from the curb. I could even remember the smell of the little bedroom. It had a wood smell, sort of piney, but stale-smelling, old. Weird, Dina said, her eyes straight ahead on the road. It was very frightening, Leah told her, partly because it all seemed so real, and partly because the girl was so needy, so desperate for me to stay. Dina drove in silence for a while, slowing to turn onto Leah's street, Fear Street. I've never moved, she said finally, glancing at Leah, then back to the street. I've lived in the same house here in Shadyside my entire life, so I don't really know what it must be like, to do what you just did. Move to a new town, a new house, a whole new world. It must be pretty scary. She paused thoughtfully, and then added, especially living on Fear Street. Yeah, it is, I guess, Leah admitted, but I've moved before. When you moved before, did you have bad dreams then, too? Dina asked thoughtfully. No. Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't really remember, Leah said, watching the old houses on Fear Street slip by, gray and ominous looking under the darkening sky. After you've adjusted, Dina continued. I mean, after you've gotten used to the new house and everything, the nightmares are bound to stop, don't you think? Yeah, I guess, Leah said doubtfully. You just have so many anxieties, and they have to come out somehow, Dina said, pulling into Leah's drive. Yeah, you're probably right, Leah said, gripping her tennis racket tightly in her lap. Well, thanks for the consultation, Doctor. Dina laughed. You can write me a check later. Leah reached for the door handle, but Dina grabbed her arm. The smile had faded from her face. I should tell you something, she said seriously, keeping her hand on Leah's jacket sleeve. What? Leah let go of the door handle. Well, I don't want to upset you even more or anything, Dina said, staring out the windshield. Dina, what? Leah asked impatiently. Well, you've made a real enemy of Marcy Hendricks. Tell me something I don't know, Leah snapped bitterly. She grabbed the door handle again. No. Listen, Dina said with some urgency. Marcy is spreading all these stupid stories about you all over school. She's saying that you're throwing yourself at Don, and that he thinks you're just pathetic. And she told some kids that you did the same thing at your old school. Leah sighed wearily. She's so mean. Well, just stay away from her, and stay away from Don, too. Marcy will do anything to hold on to Don. You really don't want her as an enemy. I wouldn't tell you all this, but... No, I'm glad you did, Leah replied. She squeezed Dina's hand and then opened the car door. Really, thanks, she said, sliding out of the car. Talk to you later, Dina called out to her. Leah watched her back down the drive, then lifted her eyes to the sky, dark as evening, the air heavy with the promise of more snow. The old house loomed over her like a shadowy giant. Leah's eyes moved up the weathered shingles to her twin-bedroom windows. Was someone staring down at her from the window on the left? No. It was just the reflection of a tree. Get a grip on yourself, Leah, she thought, shivering. The house seemed to laugh at her foolishness, a high-pitched whine of a laugh. It took Leah a few seconds to realize that the sound came from her father's power saw. She could see him working on the porch wall. She called to him, but the power saw started its whining again, drowning out her voice. Frowning, she gave up and hurried into the house. She spent the afternoon helping her father. He usually insisted on doing everything himself, but that day he actually let her measure and mark some boards, and while he took a break to have a cup of tea, he reluctantly agreed to allow her to hammer in some nails. He stood right over her shoulder, watching every swing of the hammer intently, until she finally had to stop and playfully shove him away. It was the first fun Leah had had in their new house, but it ended after only a few hours, when her mother returned from shopping with 6 Venetian blinds that she insisted be put up in the downstairs bedrooms immediately. That evening her parents were relaxing from their day-long home improvement efforts, watching TV in the den, a PBS nature documentary about gorillas. They show the same gorilla show every week, Leah complained. These are different gorillas, her father said, straight-faced. Leah went up to her room to take another stab at the chapter in the government text she should have read days before. The heat had come on. The radiator against the wall made a pleasant, steamy sound. It's so warm and toasty in here. I hope I don't fall asleep, Leah thought, adjusting her desk lamp over the textbook. She read for a few minutes, then stretched, the heat of the room making her feel drowsy as she had predicted. And then she heard a soft thud over her head. She slammed the textbook shut. I'm fully awake now, she thought. Or am I? For most of the day she had been able to force all thoughts of the attic out of her mind. But, standing up, pushing her desk chair back, Leah realized she had to return to the attic. She had to know the truth. She had to know if it had all been a vivid, terrifying nightmare or not. Out in the hall, she could hear the low murmur of the TV from downstairs. It was cooler out here. She felt wide awake now. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed the sides of the ladder and began to climb. The door will be locked and boarded up, just as it had been for 100 years, she told herself. Just as it was when I dragged Dina up here last Saturday night. Dina really must think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. The door slid away easily. Leah grabbed the frame and hoisted herself up into the attic. To her surprise, the light was on, casting its pale yellow light across the low, narrow space. It took Leah a moment to catch her balance. Then, ducking her head under the low ceiling, she turned toward the hidden room. Oh! The cry escaped her lips as she saw the 2x4s in a pile on the attic floor, just as she had left them in the dream, which wasn't a dream. She stepped forward, leaned down, and touched one of the boards, just to make sure it was real. It was solid. Yes. Then, without thinking about it, she stepped up to the door and, with a trembling hand, turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. The room was just as she had remembered it. Chapter 12. Leah gripped the doorknob tightly. She suddenly felt lightheaded, unsteady. Her knees started to tremble, as if they couldn't support her weight. Don't be afraid, the girl said. I won't hurt you. Really, I won't. She stood in front of the dresser at the back of the room, her hands at her sides, gently smoothing her long black skirt. Leah stared wide-eyed at her, as if willing her to disappear. The girl shimmered and seemed to fade for a second, flickered as the candlelight flickered. I can see right through her, Leah thought, fascinated and horrified at the same time. My name is Catherine, the girl said, lowering her eyes shyly. Leah exhaled noisily. She suddenly realized that she had forgotten to breathe. Catherine watched her expectantly, waiting for her to reply. But Leah was too frightened to tell Catherine her name, too overwhelmed to stand there and have a polite conversation. She wanted Catherine to be a dream. She wanted the room to be locked again, for the boards to be back in place. She wanted to be downstairs, safe in her room. "Please," Catherine started in her breathy little girl voice. "Are you a ghost?" Leah blurted out, still standing in the frame of the doorway, her hand on the doorknob. "Yes," Catherine replied without hesitating. Then she added with some sadness, "It took me so long to find it out, so many years to accept it, but yes, I accept it now. I really have no choice, do I?" She raised her small white hands in a gesture of helplessness. "And now you're going to haunt me?" Leah demanded. In its shadowy light, it was hard to tell if Catherine's expression was one of confusion or hurt. Her entire form darkened until she was just an outline, a billowing puff of smoke. Then slowly, her face and body filled in again. She studied Leah for a while, then said, "I'm sorry, I do not understand." "How did you get here? What are you doing here?" Leah asked. "I told you, this is my house. This is my house." "But it isn't," Leah told her impatiently. "It's not your house. It's my house." "Please come in and sit down," Catherine insisted, motioning to the edge of the canopy bed. "I won't harm you, I promise. I have been so lonely for so many years. I just want to talk." Leah reluctantly let go of the doorknob and took a few steps into the room, making sure to leave the door fully open. If she makes any move at all, I'll be out of here in a flash, she told herself. But she had to admit that Catherine seemed pretty harmless, and truly sad and lonely. She looks like a sad little girl playing dress-up in those big, old-fashioned clothes, Leah thought. "How long have you been a ghost?" Leah asked, standing in the center of the room, her arms crossed, as if for protection. "I don't really know," Catherine replied, turning to stare down at the candle on the dresser. "I've lost all track of time. I've had no contact with the outside world. For a long time, I just seemed to float. I wasn't in this room, and I wasn't anywhere. I was just floating." As she talked, her hair, a waterfall of ringlets, brightened to a golden glow, framing her perfect features in light. Her expression rigid with sadness, Catherine floated to a stiff-backed wooden chair beside the canopy bed and sat down. "At first I thought it was all a dream, a long, strange dream," Catherine continued. "But in time I came to realize the truth, that I was dead, that I had died in my own house, that I was now a spirit, a ghost, merely a ghost." She raised her pale white hands and covered her face. Leah couldn't tell if she was crying or not, but her whole body trembled, faded into a smoky gray vapor, disappeared for a brief second. When she reappeared a few seconds later, Catherine's face was calm, composed. "You died in this house?" Leah asked. The girl seemed so small, so sad, so helpless, that Leah found herself losing some of her fear. She sat down gingerly on the edge of the bed, sinking into the soft pink quilt, and leaned toward Catherine to listen to her story. "I was murdered in this house." Catherine's words came out in her soft voice, flat and without emotion. Her chin trembled slightly, the only sign of the feelings behind the words. Murdered? Leah suddenly felt chilled, despite the warmth of the attic room. The fragrant aroma of burning candle wax became too sweet, and she felt as if it would choke her. "They said I was evil," Catherine whispered, as if revealing a long-held secret. "All my life from the time I was born, I was their evil secret." "But why?" Leah asked. "What did you do?" "What did I do?" Catherine laughed, a high-pitched child's laugh. The laugh turned scornful, then died abruptly, and her face darkened. "I was born. That's what I did. I was born, and they weren't yet married." "I see," Leah said quietly. "And so I became their evil secret. They locked me up in this very room. They kept me prisoner here my entire life. They were afraid that someone would find out about me, that their precious reputations would be ruined." Catherine faded until nothing remained but the chalky white outline of her face, floating over the white high-collar blouse. When she returned to view, her eyes burned into Leah's. "Can you imagine the horror of it?" she asked. "My entire life spent in this tiny room, between these four walls, under this low ceiling. This room was my prison, my cage, and all because of something I had no control over, my birth. They were the evil ones, not me," she continued more loudly, her voice filling with vehemence. "They were the evil ones, so evil they would bring up a child as a caged animal." She stopped for a moment and sighed, her sad eyes liquid, wet in the dark light, her hands clasped in her lap, hidden in the folds of the black skirt. "I tried to escape," she continued after a moment. "I packed up my belongings. I had been working on the door lock for months. I had it all planned. I didn't know what was on the other side of the door. I had never seen the outside world, but I could hear voices outside, the sounds of hoofbeats, of carriage wheels. I heard my parents and their friends downstairs. I knew there was more to the world than my tiny room. I knew I had to escape. And did you? Leah asked, leaning forward, supporting her chin in her hands, drawn into the tragic story. My parents caught me as I was about to leave the house. I fought them. They killed me. Her voice became flat again, flat and emotionless. The glow left her eyes. Her entire form darkened. They killed me and brought me back up to this room, my prison, my cage. And then the cage became my tomb. Leah looked away, turned her eyes to the flickering candles on the dresser top. She couldn't bear to see the grief, the look of betrayal on Catherine's face. Neither girl said anything for a while. Then Catherine broke the silence. I came to accept it in time, she said softly. I came to accept the fact that I was no longer alive, no longer flesh and blood, that I was floating through the years, a spirit reflection of myself. Look, I can make myself fade and disappear. Catherine darkened to smoke, and then the smoke fell away. And I can make myself appear and glow more brightly than any living creature. The voice came out of air, but as she spoke, Catherine reappeared, the image brighter and brighter, until her golden hair seemed as fiery as the sun, and Leah had to shield her eyes. Catherine laughed, a bitter laugh. There is only one thing I have not been able to do. I have not been able to leave this room. Leah abruptly jumped to her feet. No, she said, speaking more to herself than to Catherine. No, I'm sorry. I don't believe this. I don't believe any of this. This isn't happening. Catherine was on her feet, too. Leah was surprised to see that she was at least a foot taller than Catherine. You must believe me, the ghost insisted. You must. No, I'm sorry. I have to go, Leah said, feeling the fear rise up from her stomach, choke her throat. I'm sorry. This can't be real. She turned toward the open door. Please, Catherine cried. I have to get out of here, out of this horrifying dream, Leah thought. She started for the door. Please, I've been so lonely, Catherine pleaded breathlessly. Just let me touch you. Let me touch your hair. As Leah moved to the door, she felt her hair being grabbed. Cold fingers pulled at her hair, small, cold fingers, but strong, frighteningly strong. What beautiful hair, Catherine exclaimed, tightening her grip, pulling Leah back by the hair, and turning her around until they were face to face. Catherine's eyes glowed like black oil in moonlight. What beautiful hair. Let go of me, Leah cried. Let go, you're hurting me. Catherine smiled and pulled harder. What beautiful hair. We're going to be great friends, aren't we? Let go of my hair, Leah cried. Please, let go of my hair. Chapter 13. Let go of me! With a scream of terror, Leah finally yanked herself out of Catherine's tight grasp and ran blindly from the room, into the harsh yellow light of the attic, a blur of shadows chasing her, gasping for breath, her head still tingling, still aching from the cold fingers that had pulled her hair so painfully hard. Leah staggered to the ladder. She dropped to her knees on the attic floor, flung herself onto the ladder, and, breathing hard, slid down to the hall floor. Oh! She realized she had forgotten to replace the trapdoor. Back up the ladder, her knees trembling, her whole body gripped with fear. She pulled the door back into place, then slid down again and hurried into her room. She slammed the bedroom door and leaned back against it, closing her eyes, waiting for her breathing to return to normal, waiting for the aching in her head to stop, waiting for the fear to subside. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. She repeated the words again and again in her mind until they had no meaning. Still shaking all over, she ran across the room and threw herself face down on the bed. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. She buried her face in a soft bedspread, and then pulled her head up sharply and uttered a low cry. Did I close the room to the hidden door? She asked herself. Did I lock the door? Or did I allow the ghost to escape? Would she escape? Would she come after me? Follow me down here? Leah had a sudden feeling she was being watched. She pulled herself up to her knees, frantically surveying the room. No sign of Catherine, no dark ghostly vapors, no glowing blonde hair, no pale chalky face staring back at her. But the door, the attic door, it has to be locked, Leah thought. I couldn't have left it open, could I? Climbing to her feet, she knew she had no choice. She had to go back up to the attic and make sure the door was locked. Leah knew she couldn't sleep, couldn't stay in her room, couldn't stay in the house. If she had left the door unlocked, if Catherine was free, if the ghost was free to haunt her. She took a deep breath and let it out. Catching a glimpse of herself in the oval mirror above her dresser, she stopped. She straightened her hair, pushing it into place with trembling hands. Then she opened her door and stepped out into the hallway. Downstairs, the TV was still on, the murmur of voices and music floating up the stairwell. Leah hesitated at the foot of the ladder. She felt tempted to run down to the den and tell her parents what she'd done, and what she'd found in the attic, to tell them everything. But no, she first had to make sure the door up there was locked. She had to make sure they were all safe. She pulled herself up the ladder. Her legs felt as if they each weighed 1,000 pounds, but she forced herself to the top. She reached up and slid away the wooden door in the ceiling, then pulled herself up. The light, the yellow light. She could never remember to turn it off. Pulling herself to her feet, she turned toward the hidden room, holding her breath, dreading what she knew she was going to find. But to her relief, the door was closed. Closed, but was it locked? She hurried over to the room, stumbling over the 2x4s on the floor. If only I had never touched them, she thought, with true regret. If only I had never pulled off the boards or unlocked the door, or... The key was in place. The door was locked. Leah hesitated, listening. Silence. Feeling a little relieved, she hurried away. This time, she did remember to turn off the light. The attic seemed to disappear completely in the blackness. Yes, disappear, Leah thought. Just disappear. She lowered herself onto the ladder and pulled the ceiling door in place. Safe in her room, she shut her door tightly. Trying to calm down, she paced back and forth for a while, the old floorboards creaking noisily beneath her feet. Finally, she began to feel more normal. She reached onto the bed, picked up Georgie, her stuffed tiger, and hugged him close to her. "I'm afraid, Georgie," she whispered to the tiger. "I'm really afraid." Leah stared as the tiger's eyes began to glow. Red, redder, redder, until his entire face glowed with red, demonic evil. Dropping the stuffed tiger onto the floor, Leah began to scream. Chapter 14. "Well, I couldn't believe it when she called Don," Marcy was saying, pushing back her short coppery hair as she talked. "But when she asked him out, it was just too much." The crowd of girls around Marcy burst into scornful laughter. "And I was there at Don's house on the extension the whole time. I heard the whole conversation," Marcy exclaimed, delivering a punchline to her story, then grinning broadly, her pale blue eyes lighting up with delight. As the story received the laughter and approval of her friends, Leah was standing right around the corner, hidden by her open locker door, listening the whole time, trembling with anger and embarrassment. Marcy really is sick, Leah thought. Marcy couldn't wait to start telling stories about me to her friends, and such vicious lies. Why is she doing this to me? Leah wondered. She's already won. She has Don. He's her total slave. He'll do anything she asks. When he sees her, he goes running, wagging his tail like an eager puppy. And she's totally humiliated me. She's embarrassed me in front of Don, and in front of her friends. She's got the whole school laughing at me. She's won. So why does she keep on doing this? It's sick. It's just sick, Leah decided. She slammed her locker door and spun the combination lock. Adjusting the backpack on her shoulders, she turned the corner and headed down the hall to the front exit. Two girls, pulling on down jackets at their lockers, snickered out loud as Leah walked by. Leah could feel her face growing red. Friends of Marcy, she thought bitterly, turning her face to the wall to avoid them. Angrily, she jammed her hands into her jeans pockets and kept walking. This isn't fair. Marcy is ruining my life. Ruining it. And I haven't done anything to her. If only there was some way to get back at her, she said to herself, pushing open the front door to the school and stepping out into a bright but blustery day. Then maybe she'd leave me alone. All the way home, first on the bus, then walking against a gusting wind, watching the swirl of leaves around her, breathing the sweet, sour autumn air, Leah dreamed out suitable revenges, but none of them seemed suitable enough. I don't want to play any kind of dumb practical joke, Leah decided. I want Marcy to feel really bad, really grossed out maybe, really humiliated. No, really frightened. Yes, Leah wanted to scare Marcy. A smile spread across Leah's face as she turned onto Fear Street, a funnel-shaped cloud of brown leaves, swirling high over the street ahead of her, past the cemetery that sloped up to the right, the crooked old gravestones standing as silent gray sentries. Yes, I want Marcy to be terrified, Leah thought, so engrossed in her schemes that she didn't see the squirrels that scampered just in front of her on their way to scavenge for acorns in the old cemetery. I want her to be as terrified as I was up in the attic last night. Last night. Yes. The idea seems to fall into place, so that by the time Leah unlocked the back door and stepped through the pantry into the kitchen, carefully wiping the wet soles of her sneakers on the mat by the door, she knew what she wanted to do. The idea frightened her, but only a little. It would frighten Marcy a whole lot more, Leah decided. She tossed her backpack onto the kitchen counter, then checked the refrigerator door for messages. None. Odd, Leah thought. Her mother almost always had some emergency instructions or news bulletins for her. Heading to the front hall, she pulled off her coat and tossed it over the banister. Then she ran up the creaking stairs, cheered by her scheme, her eagerness to get back at Marcy forcing away the fear she knew she should be feeling. She's ruining my life. Ruining it. The words ran through her mind again and again as she paced back and forth in her bedroom, thinking about her plan, chilled by it, excited by it. Stop thinking about it and just do it, she urged herself finally. Stepping out into the hallway, Leah pulled herself quickly up the ladder and slid back the trap door. She stepped into the attic, half expecting the boards to be back in place, the hidden room locked and boarded up, her encounter the night before all a vivid, mysterious dream. But the boards were still on the floor. The smooth wooden door stood against the wall, exposed and inviting. The fear returned. Despite her excitement, despite all of her plans for revenge, the fear came back. Leah could feel her throat tighten, feel all of her muscles tighten as she made her way to the door. A silent voice inside her, the voice of her conscience most likely, her sensible voice, her realistic voice, told her to back away. Get out of there. Leave the door alone. Leave the ghost alone. The voice told her to close up the attic, to stay away from there, to tell her parents about it, to tell her parents about Catherine, to let them deal with this, to let them face all the fear. But that sensible voice was too quiet. It was drowned out by a much shriller voice, a much more powerful voice, a much more compelling voice, the voice that called for revenge. "Open the door," Catherine called from inside the secret bedroom. "Please, open the door and come in." Leah turned the key and, without hesitating to listen to her sensible voice, pushed open the door and stepped in.